under work session agendas. I'm seeing a wonderful picture in the background. I don't know where that is necessarily. Thanks, Josh.
No problem.
Everybody have a good 4th of July and everything? Good. Okay, so we've got the owl and Marie's iPhone. The owl is always watching.
What's on the radio today?
Okay, do you have anything to add to honor Amy? No? All right, well, we'll let the record reflect, at least at the start of the meeting, that there's no non-arranged participation, and turn it over to you, and David can take us through what's in the payment.
Sure. So most of what's in your work session packet is what we've seen in previous meetings, that were a handful of sheets that were provided by David, I think sent over yesterday.
Sorry about that.
Well, you tasked us with providing some additional information 2 weeks ago. And I did get it in time to have it for this meeting. So I'll hand it to David just to talk through what was provided.
Thanks, Justin. I do apologize for getting to you late. I got most of the information late Friday, and I needed to pour through it myself before I felt confident to send it to you. So it took me a little bit longer than I thought, so I apologize for you getting it late. So I outlined in the memo generally my approach, and from last meeting, we looked at where we were as a comparison for the 2 stations with or 2 locations with new construction and renovation expansion. And we looked at it more in the range of where we were looking at the map site previously. So this version, as we kind of talked about, was, is there a lesser costly version? And I kind of took that from several perspectives of the conversation. Not just making the building cheaper, but making it cost less and maintaining the functionality that we've all kind of been looking at over the years. The thing I did do, which might make you think functionality changed, is looked at areas that could be reduced in size. And I mentioned a few off the top of my head when we were here late June. One I mentioned was the locker room, shower, bathroom area was laid out in the more traditional format, which is a men and a women's locker rooms with showers and appropriate levels and toilet fixtures. More currently, over recent years, it's been a question: is that the right way to do it? Anyway, the solution I propose by square footage changing is it's a locker room where everybody goes, and there's a single occupant shower or restrooms that a person would go to do their changing in restroom needs. So that reduces the square footage of that central area of any station, but I'm really thinking, I'm visualizing in my head the MAV site where it's kind of in the middle of the building. The other thing I mentioned was potential to reduce the bay size. And that really was more specifically towards the MAV site also, where we have a pull through, but it's a double. It's an in and an out from both sides. It's not what we call a true pull through, where it's one apparatus in a bay. It's 2 apparatuses in a bay. But when I look at the apparatus you have and their size and what you're projecting, if I don't put the 2 biggest ones in the same bay, which maybe reduces your flexibility, but still very appropriate to have a big one, a medium one, a big one, a medium one, or 2 medium ones in a bay, I could reduce the bay size I had by about 8 feet. So I did that. So it's somewhere in the range of 800 square feet. Then I also looked at where else could I take that same approach, and the other areas were the decon. I'm using MAV again as my reference here. Just a couple little tweaks, and I'll say this: with what we have been looking at is very conceptual. So I've been diving into certain areas with more of a critical eye that I would use in the development to what would I do to change it. So in the decon, it expands to the north, maybe 4 feet more than it needs to. If I rotate the sink and put it on the outside wall there, I could take some square footage out. Now I use that same kind of approach in a couple other areas. In the training area, there's a storage in the office, again, at the map site. Then a corridor with coats and so forth in between those two spaces. If I shrink those to about 4 feet and take that same shrinkage, which I already mentioned, the shower rooms would change. That's where I would change that. And I'd pull the fitness room where it aligns on the outside to the north with the day room kitchen. I'd pull that down to the south about that 4 feet that I would take out of the office and the storage for the training. So again, I'm reducing square footage in several areas. So that would change the footprint and therefore cost of the building. And then besides that kind of look at it, I said, looking at what we reviewed before, the good, better, best spectrum, where could we change things without at all changing functionality? It would change first cost in how you build the building, and it would change maintenance operation costs and how you maintain it. But there are many ways, and I gave you that little sample in the packet, how you can look at materials from a good, better, best standpoint and potentially save upfront first cost dollars. So this is what we looked at previously with maybe some minor tweaks, but or things added to it. But this is how we would say, let's take the model that we had, budget model that is, for the MAV site previously, make it more like what we had at Main Street in that called $3 million version, and bring down costs for both of them. So that was the approach, or how I applied that. A couple other things maybe in constructability that we looked at was single wide masonry versus cavity wall masonry, where the energy code would allow us to do that, which is really only at the apparatus and support spaces for the apparatus. That's a significant part of the building. We looked at hip roofs on both versions of the previous plan, and I mentioned at the last meeting that we would be looking at the low slope flat roof, which is a significant savings. And for both versions in the last cost model, we looked at predominant masonry stone exterior facade finishes. And this version would change that to be an imagery of masonry, but have some subtleness with siding and other materials to kind of bring down cost. Reduce height and glass where we can, not changing functionality, but changing visual aesthetics and appearance. And then a couple of minor little things, and I think I mentioned it in the good, better, best. Well, maybe not to this degree, but you see I have overhead apparatus doors, or a combination of overhead and 4 fold doors, but there's also further things you can do. Typically, you're looking at a full glass door for a fire station with a pull through. It's okay, and it's generally common now that the front is mostly glass, with the bottom panel being a material, but the back doors are the doors that are on Main Street or the Main Street are more of a solid door with ports, so it's a little less costly, but still it's a door with some vision to the outside. So those are some of the, I'll call it the main things that we looked at in taking the version of what we had before cost model wise, and then bringing it down from the better best version to a good better version of both stations with those square footage reductions. So we were able to reduce costs, and hopefully you see that. Maybe there's some confusion too, and I want to go through. I talked about call it the project building costs and then soft costs previously and escalation costs. And I think maybe we got a little, not muddy, but we might have all left that conversation thinking different things because of the way it was presented. So in this version, I wanted to capture all of those things in the bottom line. Meaning that this budget says if you were to bid it in January 23, this price represents our best professional opinion what it would cost if you bid it in January. After that, maybe a month or even after that, it goes up. But, so what I'm saying is that escalation, that unknown variable, we put that into this number. In addition to that, I mentioned that subcontractors get hit during the course of projects with material increases. So we've included an escalation number, and that's, we'll call it below, if you're looking at a budget, there's a green line called the construction total cost. Below that, there's 3 items. The very bottom one's estimating escalation, design contingency. So there's a little bit percentage-wise for the construction entity to absorb potential subcontractor claims for supplier issues. So that's not general escalation. The general escalation is already in the numbers above the green line. And then I went through the soft cost and included that here too. So some of the things I indicated before, let me just look at it real quick here. I said construction contingency, technology, and furniture and fixtures were in the number. That plus all the other soft costs are now in that portion that fits below the green line. There's some variables if you look at it. Any questions to that to this point in terms of how I dealt with the escalation?
I'm trying to read off the small size here. What was the escalation you estimated?
The estimated is 7%, I think, for subcontractor costs, within that 7%. But the number that is in the total cost up till January 23 is already in the numbers. It's not a percentage, it's in those numbers.
Okay, well, from this year to next year, what was your?
7 to 10%.
Okay.
And just to expand upon that a little bit, things change quickly. As of, well, I'm looking at 2 major things, steel and wood. End of March, steel, I'm not going to remember the exact price, but between end of March and today, as of today's commodity prices on steel and wood, steel is 32% down where we were trending up. And that was part of the complication of bidding something. Wood is 30% down as of today as compared to in the March. From my best networking through the construction industry people, materials are generally stabilizing. Some are still on the high side, but the big ones that were causing the big question marks, steel and wood, there are others. Insulation, you probably heard about that, and now concrete too. But generally stabilizing or trending down. The upside is labor. Labor is not trending down. Labor is trending up. That's why that 7 to 10% contingency is there, not the historical 3 to 4%. So it's up from what we would normally see, but less than what I would have told you probably in March or early in spring. Did that answer your question, Zach?
Yeah, no, I just wouldn't. I wanted to know how it was different because when I was at the Fire Station Design Conference, they were estimating 33% from this year to next year.
And I would agree with that, depending on when you say, if it was January to,
It was May
yeah,
or
May,
end of April.
end of April, so we were just coming off of what was the high.
Yeah, it was when Amazon bought all the steel mills and wasn't even
Yeah.
taking orders for anything but theirs.
Right, yeah, they bought up 25% of the steel
Yeah.
last year, and this year, I don't know the percentage, but end of March is when most of the commodity prices hit their peak. And like I said, 32% of steel and 30% of wood, so maybe that number that you got, I don't know when that was prepared, but it's been trending down for sure. Exactly where, I guess that's everybody's best guess, so. We're saying in at least the contracting group that I'm talking to is 7 to 10% if you are looking at year over after January. Which, yeah, is it right? I don't know, but to hedge our bets, I included escalations for sub-trade costs within the project number. And that's a very complicated thing. I know it is, and that's why I try to put it right here so it was not just a conversation that was accounted for on paper.
Can you ask about the site development cost?
I'm sorry?
The site development cost,
Yes,
so across the three, so I'm looking on pages, I can't tell what pages we have it, 22, are they all labeled 22, and 42 at the bottom? I guess so. It's where you have like the charts, the detail, yeah, this table,
The three charts.
the three tables with the itemized
Yes.
cost, quantity, estimated cost. So on the expansion, you have demolition and site development at 730,000 for the reno. For a new build at Main Street, it's 840,000, and for the MAP site, 1 million, just over 1 million. So I'm just curious, what is involved in site development and why? What is more to be done? This is just,
site development is generally made up of moving the dirt and all the utilities to come to the facility that you're going to build. That's generally what it is. There's a lot more to it than that.
okay,
And when I say utilities, it's storm, it's water, it's telecommunications, electricity. Dirt is moving the dirt around to make it to the grade you want for paving and building pad, et cetera. And then there's demolition in it too. So the main difference between the numbers, and they vary, I'll use the Main Street site as an example. So the first version is demolition site development. And the first version of that is a limited demolition. We're keeping the building superstructure. In the second version, which is a new building on Main Street, we're completely removing the existing building. So that development cost is more. Between the two sites now, why is Main Street less than MAV? Is, there's a fair amount of infrastructure and I'll call it ground preparation, because there's a building there already on Main Street as compared to a green site where we're gonna have to do a lot of undercutting to prepare a building pad. So there's less work to be done based on the fact that there's something on the Main Street site.
that's what I thought.
There might be that nuance I just described, the existing building and the existing site with some preparation. There might be some other aspects of that, in other areas also. If it comes to mind, I'll mention it. The other things I wanted to kind of point out that, like you just did, there's some differences. So general conditions vary from 10.5% to 11.25%. The easiest being the MAV site in terms of general conditions. It's kind of predictable. It's not downtown where general conditions would take care of street cleaning, street safety, dust protection, mitigation of pedestrian type potential security issues, fencing and that kind of thing. It's just a little bit more of a slow go. So the general conditions is increased in that environment as compared to the MAV site. Overhead profit remains the same for either. Just kind of clipping down to the next one, that's different is contingency. I mentioned that contingency would be different between the renovation and a new building last time, but I did reduce the contingency as a matter of pulling the cost down. So 7.5% is a generous, well, I'm going to start with the lesser number. 5% is a generous number. I kept that for the new building. I would expect there'd be a fair amount of that left, half or more. But it's there for emergencies that you don't know about, so that's why I maintained it. I did the same thing for the new building at Main Street, but I made it a little bit more because I anticipate that when we tear down the existing, if that's the route you go, that we're gonna find something we have to deal with. That's why it's not 5, it's 5.5. And then the worst case scenario is that the renovation, you try to maintain what's there. And you're gonna run the stuff that you don't know about. So, and then just existing conditions that are surprises. So that's why that's a little higher. Professional fees, kind of the same thing, which includes a kind of a catch-all of things. I don't know what your legal costs would be, but bond preparation and review, architecture, engineering is site work, as well as general MEP. I don't remember what I said our architectural fee at one time. I already kind of gave that to you guys some time ago. So it's probably 2/3 of that, roughly, is my guess. And then the soft costs kind of stayed the same across the board at 6.5%. That soft cost would be things that you would be dealing with, and that's kind of where I put furniture, technology. We talked about at the last meeting. And there are just a number of things that happen, I know, ribbon cutting, that kind of thing. You're gonna have expenses for stuff like that. That generally doesn't get used in totality, but it's there in the beginning, so you plan financially properly. So that's kind of my review of it. I would say, I'm going to go back to my notes here. In telling you all that, and I really wrestled with what am I really trying to do? I'm trying to answer your questions. I'm trying to give you information to make decisions. So I kind of sat in your seat for a minute when I was trying to think through how I prepare something that will be meaningful for you. What would I want to know? But I'm making some questions. And my first two questions you see in my memo there, I think you need to decide a couple of things. I'll skip down to 3 questions that need to be answered. If you pick which location, it kind of helps with the next question. Is it new, or it will be new if it's bad, or is it a renovation? And with the renovation, we've gone over at length in some areas, and there's still more to be looked at. What are the compromises that you have to make? We know that there are compromises, but it may be offset by the potential less cost for the renovation. And more importantly, maybe what I took away from the meeting last week was not just the cost of the building as we're talking about it. It's really what is the community able or willing to support as costs. You know, I know you have budgets, and everyone, as it came out of the last meeting, has household budgets, and this all comes out of household costs. So my thought was, if you were able to answer those questions, not necessarily that order either, but answer those questions, there is a solution. If you pick a site, you pick whether it's a new building or a renovation, if you pick the cost, there is a version of almost anything that could fit into a budget, as long as you're willing to prioritize what's the most important things and compromise when you can in order to meet that cost budget. It's really easy for me to say that. And I know it's difficult to do, but I've worked through a lot of scenarios where it's been tough but successful. And that's kind of how I surmised me trying to be beneficial. I could do as much as you want me to do. But I think until you answer some of those questions, it's going to be hard for me to hit the nail on the head.
I reached out, I've done a little bit of reading about post-frame construction,
Can you say that again?
post-frame construction,
Post-frame.
post-frame or pole barns.
Over, okay.
And that maybe, is that what Dexter Township has, Webster Township, are those? No. Neither of those are there?
They look like it, it's just the aesthetic. But they don't.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts on, I mean, it seems like there are companies that claim this is an ideal material or method of building for municipal buildings, but they just need to be big and you can save a lot on cost. I saw one estimate that it was almost 50% less than square footage cost, and those numbers could be outdated. So I don't know what your experience is in working with that type of a building, or what your just general comments on trade-offs, if you like dramatically shift.
There's probably a couple different points on that. So pre-engineered buildings, well, I'll call it, maybe that's what the township is. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it has, it is. So I have a fair amount of experience in that, and I do look at that as an option when we're going through costing discussions. In general, pre-engineered building is the superstructure and the envelope. And I'm not sure what your research would have showed you, because it probably wasn't clear. It's my guess. It doesn't include the foundation that supports the structure. They exclude that generally. And it's just material showing up on a truck. It's not erected. So their square foot numbers look very attractive. And I'll say they're between $10 and $50 a foot, maybe 50 to the high side, but for the package, I'll call it a building package, and there's all the other stuff. And an example I'll share is, building finish line is 2020, maybe 21 or 19. It was for Grosse Pointe. It was a public works facility, and it needed to be economical. And we looked at conventional construction in a cheapest form, and we looked at pre-engineering in engineered building, and that was based on delivery it was the best choice. It was quicker, at least in theory, it was quicker. But it ended up being $132, $135 a square foot. And it was exactly what you expected. It was a metal frame, big open span. It was perfect for a DPW. Not real perfect for a fire station in total. I would say a fire station could benefit from in the apparatus bay. I don't want to say only, but mostly. I had looked at that, and the end result was no, it wasn't going to be the most cost effective for Highland. Actually was one of the examples where we said, can we do the bay and pre-engineered solution? And based on the fact that we were doing conventional construction everywhere else, the answer was no, we already have all the people here doing this other work. The other thing that comes into play, in its purest form, it's cheap, it really is, but it looks like a metal building. For the Main Street, not remembering the district, but I know that there are material requirements in terms of facade material. The same thing with the Dexter or overlay, certain percentages of masonry, stone, and so forth. So that type of building wouldn't be, in its purest form, the metal building, cost effective, because we'd have to add, like we would normally do, a veneer of some sort. But I wouldn't rule out, based on this, I'm using Mav as the example, Main Street, it wouldn't work, in my opinion. I would look at it, but I would almost bet it's not an option. But for Mav, it would be, because you have 5 bays, very simple, uniform, front to back, open space, and you could insert that construction philosophy in between 2 things, and there's this pre-engineered element. You still have to dress up the front, but maybe because of the overlay ordinance, but I think there's a potential savings to use that, or at least to run through the VE on it to see if it works. And that kind of thing, looking at construction types, and it's kind of on this good, better, best list. I thought it was. I don't see it. But if you look at bearing wall construction versus veneer construction, precast type thing, then we'll have to have some precast in the station for mezzanine and for the storm shelter. You don't completely get away from some of the more costly construction things, but you can balance it between conventional masonry, which might work better in the support area where it's a pretty dirty, robust working area, or if it's not masonry, it'll get damaged and we'll be fixing it all the time. As compared to the apparatus bay, that could be pre-engineered, and on the living side, it could be maybe metal stud infill. So you have 3 different types where you're really trying to economize each construction type in an area that is suitable. So we do that pretty normal as the course of setting up the initial, what is the building going to be? We don't do it at this stage, but in the next level of schematic design, you start to develop the design. You really look at construction options in terms of cost and life cycle. Life cycle is really important. You know, a building that's owned and occupied, and then municipal buildings are owned and occupied by the owner. Fire stations typically are 50-year buildings. You save 30 years, but their life is normally 50 years. And you really want the kind of enduring materials that masonry is a good example is going to give you.
Yeah, and to that, 2 fire stations about 10 miles apart. One's in Benton, the other is North Oakland County Fire Authority. They're built in the same year, if I recall. Benton used masonry on the inside. North Oakland was the steel building. And if you went in them, you would think that the North Oakland is twice as old as the Benton. The Benton building still has all the original paint. They haven't touched anything on the inside, anything on the outside. They've had to redo the epoxy floor and the apparatus bay like 2 or 3 times because no one can get that right. But the North Oakland feels very beat up and tired. And And same age.
Yeah, it's the that's like the question, is first cost more important or is life cycle over the use of the building more important? I'll give you an example. I did a couple studies and I'll use flooring. It was vinyl composition tile. I mean, everybody knows what that is, I hope, right? It's 12 by 12 vinyl. It's kind of simple form, but it's cheap. It's really cheap. You see it everywhere in schools. As compared to terrazzo, which is really nice, but very expensive. Probably in the range of 9 or 10 times as expensive. But over the life cycle of use of that floor, terrazzo winds up being cheaper than vinyl composition tile. And that's the life cycle, like the wear and tear aspect of it, because you have to maintain things that are cheaper every year, every month, whatever the period might be. So in general, it depends on where you want to spend money to be cheap or less expensive, not necessarily cheap, but you can spend more upfront and less to operate or vice versa.
Keep going there.
I'm not able to discern this, for the Main Street cost, does that include temporary facility?
Yes, they did, yeah. And I had a number, let me see if I think it was 250,000, if I remember right. I'm gonna struggle to find it, but I did have that in there. I'm not seeing it as I'm looking, but I do know that it's in there.
Okay, and
Let me see.
I hope this doesn't sound pointy, but 250,000 is significantly different from folks that I talk to repeatedly that says you're looking at $1 million for temporary facility to use for a year to year and a half. What does a $250,000 temporary facility entail? Does it require us to have an empty industrial building that we can use?
Yeah, that's,
Tents?
no, you have to find a building that's available that will work to house apparatus.
And if we
And
don't have an
everything-
existing building, what does that cost look like then?
I don't know what it looks like unless we describe an exact scenario. It can be build a temporary station in order to build a real station. I mean, that's a solution.
Zach, would like the Adair building work? I'm just picking a big building in town. It's really low ceiling height to me. But I can't.
Yeah, and it has
no ceiling right
different
now, so
sloped floors and is leased out.
I've never been, is it all leased out? Okay, I didn't know that. That's a
Because
good,
we
that's a
have,
good thing too.
we have a dearth of vacant industrial buildings, which is a good problem to have sometimes.
I could look at that further in terms of temporary rental type things that show up when you plop them on site. But my thought was the approach would be find a building, occupy it, kind of stand on your head, provide service. But that would be kind of the limit of what you'd be able to do out of it. You wouldn't be able to move in and feel like you're in a fire station.
Yeah, and I would say we have our community development director, we don't really have any vacant industrial buildings.
We may have, yeah, and that's what I just heard of it. Excuse me, if I remember right, I don't want to say the name, but there is an industrial property that's being sold or being done for sale.
Vacant and for sale.
Vacant and for sale. It's not very long. So I can pull up this email that I received and provide some more details if you'd like.
Yeah, I don't see the number, Zach, but I'm looking at the soft cost, so it's 5% as compared to 6.5. So that extra 1.5 on soft costs on both versions of Main Street would be the amount for temporary accommodations. If you're not sure where I'm showing that, it's in the,
I just want to make sure it's in there.
Yeah.
It's- Yeah, what I heard that to be significant cost if you don't have an empty building.
imagine it can be. Without knowing some particulars, it's hard to put a number a real number.
So let me throw out a couple of things. I'm not quite sure where to start. Jack, you're always, you can kind of throw spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks a little bit. So I was talking to Doug Armstrong, who's joined us this evening, he's sitting in the audience. Doug is now our interim fire chief here in Dexter. And I'm sorry for saying this, but I'm focused on the cost of everything I'm throwing out there. So the question that I was gonna throw out there is, well, I'm struggling with the cost of this, just because they're big numbers to me. With that in mind, the things that are driving to me the cost of this, based upon the information we have from David, are the size of the bays and the square footage of the building. And the square footage of the usable part of the building. There's the bay part and there's the living, working part. If we kept the sheriff downtown, take that part off of the equation. I'm focused on the MAV site because that's the new site, the easier to build, I think, based upon what we heard last time. And Doug, I might ask you to speak up and help me here, but we only have 4 bays in downtown right now. 4 in the city, and we've had 4 forever. As far as I know, at least before I got here, there were 4, and there's still 4. If we built 3 double bays on the MAV site and didn't build the training room side of this, or the fire site, the police, the sheriff, sorry, that's the word I want to use, sheriff. If we kept the sheriff downtown, I mean, you could almost renovate 8140 into a meeting space for training. And it would still give you flexibility to go both ways on the station. And I guess my question is that enough of a station? And I don't know how to answer it because we draw these pictures with vehicles and there's 2 big ones, 3 littler ones, and 4 even smaller ones. So I don't know if the 2 big ones is that 2, I'm looking at, sorry, on page.
There's 2 engines.
Well, I think one of those is a ladder,
And
I
a
guess.
proposed ladder. Yeah, there is a ladder, but there. I don't know what you're really looking at.
Page.
Okay,
It's the detailed layout of floor plan for the MAV site. And, what I'm trying to figure out is, can we go from 4 single bays to something like 3 double? And could without getting into all the superstructure of the existing fire station, make that in a meeting space somehow? If we needed to have a lot of people. I'm expanding on an idea you helped think about, so
So
jump
you're
in
saying
if
cut
I'm.
out the training room also?
I'm saying, well, I'm trying to get the square footage down on this. All
Right,
of this
but you're
is,
saying the meeting space you're saying would be in place of the training room.
I'm saying the meeting space over at 8140 would be in place of the training room right
So
there.
that would go away.
So I'm looking at this
Yeah, that's what-
thing and I put an X through, we don't need the sheriff, because keep that downtown. Maybe this meeting room goes over there, and maybe we build 3 double bays instead of 5. And we get the cost down to something that's, I'm gonna say in the 2 mil range. I'm not quite sure, I have some questions on the taxable value that we're using in the formula. I'm not quite sure I completely follow the 277 that's there. But those are questions I can ask Justin afterwards.
something I'll throw out if you don't mind, based on what I just heard you say. We have wrestled with this kind of dilemma before, and I'm looking at some of the apparatus, educational trailer, boats, maybe it's nothing you jump in and go, but something you would hook up and bring.
Right, but where is all this now? I mean, it's not all in the city, is my point.
I'm
Is
not
it's
exactly sure.
Well, I think it's a pertinent question.
So what I was gonna
Because-
suggest is that an outbuilding houses those things that you don't jump in and go. And we've done it in a couple of stations where it really brings into that equation, the purest form of pre-engineered building, because it's really not a conditioned space, it's a storage space, but it's out of the elements. That's an idea.
And that's what Scioto Township has, correct? Where they've got the trailers and stuff out back.
I'm not familiar with site. But we're,
Doug,
right now, we're doing Brighton, that's what we're doing, is a separate outbuilding for those things you don't jump in and go. That you would hook up and go somewhere.
So like a 4x4 gator on trailer.
Right,
Yeah, I wasn't trying to be specific about knowing what should fit in the 3 double bays, okay, I'm always, but. I mean, the long-term plan for DAFD that we've been talking about is to try and get to 6 full-time firefighters, which would have 2 at each station. So whatever it is that the first 2 would take and go off with, those would be the first 2 I'd make sure are in there, but. These pictures, this makes it look like there's 2 ladder trucks in there.
well, it is, one is, I'll call it symbolically shown in the maintenance wash area, just to show fit. It could be a smaller, it could be something else. There are, when this was prepared, I didn't have the real list of the projected apparatus, which I got.
It's okay, it's okay, I'm just talking like this.
And I'm just trying to describe it to you, but I guess your point is, a question maybe Doug or,
Well, because and I know I'm mixing concepts here, but it would be great, I mean, if we could go from 4 bays to effectively 6, that's 50% increase in bays. That seems like a pretty good increase to me,
yeah,
okay? The living areas are really what people talk about the most. It's horrible living and working areas in terms of the look and feel and the use of the space and the lack of functionality for, gender equality and better ways of working. And that part I like the layout of that there, or I like the layout of the new one, the renovated station. But if we're looking for something that works towards the 50-year model, I'd like to get this thing down around 2 mils as the ask. I don't want to try to have to ask for more personally. And I think that could be a reasonable target. But I think we're looking at the extremes right now. We're looking at building, 10 the equivalent of 5 double bays at Nav, and the equivalent of 5 full bays plus something downstairs. I don't even know is it 8? It's not
two more down.
2 more. So it's not even apples to apples, but they're the extremes on each site.
I did,
And I think there's a compromise somewhere in there is what I've been thinking as we've been getting the data the last couple of meetings. I guess I'm gonna just throw that out there.
could I ask what a 2 mil target looks like from a dollar standpoint?
Well, I didn't go so far as to back calculate into that because I'm not trying to pick the number that way. I think that, that there's a taxable value here that's on the worksheet. I'm looking at the $10 million impact or whatever, just from the sheet that I'm looking at.
When we did the math in 2020, 2.9 mils was 10 million.
In 2020, yeah, it was just under 3 mils, right? Yeah. I'm with you.
2.9, spent what, 9 million.
Well, and this is, I guess, I think that would generate something less than 10 for sure.
The reason I ask, I'm not trying to throw a wrench in it, but if there were this sort of thing established, this is how much we can spend. 3 or 4 different interesting ideas I just heard could be explored if we say that the end is this. You have to do something within that number, whatever that number is.
Well, I'm trying to think about the positives that we can communicate so that people understand what we're trying to achieve and match that to a number. And right now, the story is we're building 2.5 times the number of bays that we have.
But we have stuff in the basement too.
I know we have stuff there, but it's not.
So you jump in and go.
Well, I don't know how critical it is that it's right.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't even know if it's the right, you know,
Well, see,
should the
that's
gator
why
be in
we have
downtown,
to-
or if we had,
have to kind of that.
if we had the people in the right place, the gator might be, or whatever area should be out in a different station. I just don't, you know, I'm not trying to choose that. But I mean, it seems,
I'm on you now.
but, you know, maybe this outbuilding is another alternative that's a cheaper than building the whole base. And if you ever wanted to expand, you could still go left and right on this, because the site's plenty big.
Expanding a fire station is difficult without a lot of.
I understand.
But if that's a criteria, you design it so that's possible.
Go ahead, Jim. I'm still.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the creativity, and I think that's what's needed to find the solution. We've heard the term first cost a number of times tonight, or we're looking at minimize first costs or long-term maintenance costs, kind of a trade-off there. And I think for me, you know, as I mentioned before, I think the main sticking point for me is that the full cost burden right now is on the city of Dexter, as opposed to spread out across the service area. And we talked about the likelihood of that being able to change seems unlikely. One thought I had, or question I had is there a way, so I am also partial to the, I don't know if Mayor Q is partial, but I prefer the MAB location. I prefer something new with the MAB location. I am also then looking for a solution that I think reduces first costs, because those are the costs, you know, borne by the city of Dexter residents. We make that ask of city of Dexter residents for something that then is modifiable or expandable or something after we're able to renegotiate something with the other municipalities to say, okay, we fronted the gist of what we needed here as the same way you fronted the gist of what you needed for your substations. Now we all need to come together, revisit our interlocal agreement and figure out what more needs to be done in a way that we actually share that cost. So for me, I'm looking to take it one step further, I think, which is, yes, reduce what we have here at MAB, but then also structure it in such a way that in short order, once we get that taken care of, we then work something out for the other, whatever costs are. And so I don't know if that's like, we've got a first phase where we build, what we need, and then shortly after there's a second phase, maybe that's not at all cost efficient, but I would really have a hard time supporting a solution that means city of Dexter pays the full and complete cost. And there's never an ask made or contribution made by the other townships. That would be difficult.
That's what I was saying all of the last work session, is that's the same sticking point for me, I just don't think it's equitable in terms of service area and population of the people who are making this ask.
Well, I've said, I like the MAP site from the perspective that it's clean. It's a green site. Assuming there's no contamination found there or anything that causes that extra thing that we don't know about. It's an open site, it's flat, it should be very easy to build there. It used to have old tires, that's right, thank you, Paul. I know, that's what concerns me. What I don't like about it is its response time. I don't like that the majority of the runs that the district responds to are in the townships. And from that location, it's gonna be longer, and all those calls are gonna go right through the downtown, every time. Now, ideally, if we get to a situation where we have 2 people at each station, you could argue that the number of runs that have to go out of the main station are less. Okay, but if that's the case, then you're gonna have all the necessary equipment out in the other stations anyway, you won't need it in the main station. Right? I mean, you wouldn't put it where you aren't gonna run from.
I agree.
So all of that to me tells me that there's something smaller that can be built, and I'm the only one that doesn't like the location from a response time, so I'm trying to find a way to compromise on that and get to something that is doable. If everybody's okay with the trucks racing through town and figuring out, the old chief,
Well,
the old chief said,
Continental.
well, they do, but
Every
not.
single exit requires driving through a portion of downtown.
Through the neighborhoods.
Well, a high percentage of it goes out of the station and under the viaduct and does not go through what I would call downtown. Okay, and Dexter Township is 40%, what's that?
Webster Township runs go that way. It's longer.
Well, Dexter Township is about 40% of the runs. And those all go up.
Of the shared ones,
Well,
not all the ones,
You mean of
of the price
the
share,
price ones?
not including the 20% that are shared costs.
Okay, you're right. I can figure it out the other way too.
60%.
It's a, will you give me that 60% of the runs go up or more go up either Dexter, Pinckney or Central? Would you buy that?
Yep.
So now all of those runs, 100% of those runs, if they come from the map site, are gonna have longer to get to both of those two arteries. So you're right, there's trucks in downtown. I just wanted to be clear, that's how I feel about the response time. I can get over that if nobody else is concerned about that. Well, the city doesn't lose at the map site.
And so,
Because I mean, certain parts of the village or city are gonna have longer response times, like the Cedars are gonna have a longer time. Or if there's a fire in downtown, the trucks gotta get to downtown as opposed to right now they're there. But I just wanted to be clear about, she asked the question, which do I favor? I think both sites have pros and cons. To me, the pro of the downtown station is response as it relates to some of our more vulnerable areas and how it helps get out into the rest of the district if I'm wearing my DAFD hat. If I'm only wearing my city hat, then the map site suits us fine, and I can get to that compromise. But if that's the case, and the long-term vision, if we're having a 50-year vision, we ought to think about what the 50-year vision of DAFD is. I think it's more firefighters and a distribution of trucks that's different than what's outlined on paper here. And I think that means we could build a smaller station that's still 50% higher in bays, 4 full to 3 doubles, and greatly improve I'm not trying to take away the decon areas or all the other benefits of it. Other than I think the meeting station, for the training room that we would need could be another place, and I'm just throwing that out there.
now if you move it off-site, though, you lose some of the benefit of reduced response time. So remember, response time is more than just how long you're in the vehicle. Response time is when does someone call to when you get there, depending on the incident, and maybe when the fourth person arrives there.
I understand, but I think there's more and more training that's gonna be done online during the day, individually by firefighters, that's not necessarily always group. And for the few times that's group exercises where we actually need the largest room, I mean, maybe there's a smaller space, maybe you don't completely eliminate, James, because it's up and I don't have mine up. Maybe you don't completely eliminate the 50% station, or 50, maybe it comes down to, half of that for 20, for our group or something, I don't know. I'm trying to find a way to reduce the cost of that, is all I'm going at. I'm not even trying to argue with anybody about anything, because I think we're all struggling with the same things.
In terms of them going through the neighborhoods, are we going to have to do any infrastructure improvements to those streets before we even try to run them from this end of town to the other end of town?
Well,
I'm trying to look at Inverness or Sackins or whatever, and wondering what will they handle, what will Fifth handle, where will they go, and what happens in the long run is my question.
fully laden fire truck weighs as much as a garbage truck. So if it can handle a fire truck or garbage truck, it can support the weight of a fire truck.
Yeah, like I said, I think there's certainly fire trucks are maybe noisier, louder, going faster
But the
ideally.
weight's not a concern.
I don't think the weight is the issue. I think our team and our engineers sitting there somewhere, I think we walked in. I think we're building, I think we're building roads that will handle all the vehicles we need for the things.
Okay.
I'm more concerned about, if the desired path is to go down Inverness to Fourth, there's a pretty tight turn there. If there happens to be a car parked there, and that's the common thing, they're gonna have to stop instead of slow down. Whereas if there's nobody there, they can slow down and make a wider turn. I'm more concerned about maneuverability and
Yeah,
through, and whereas, now they come,
is it manageable?
now they make the left out of the station, they
Yeah.
make a left on the central, now they might have to wait to get those two a little bit, but then it's straight shot on central, or the right turn, it's straight shot up. Obviously, when it's not
Oh,
crowded,
but then we've heard coming, people are out of the way as well.
and we could think about some of those things that improve streets if that's where it goes, but I'm trying to find a compromise here that I think gets to a more palatable number. Doug, I don't know if you care to comment on anything, or if you do, you don't have to, but that's what I'm.
No, I think you hit on issues we've talked about, or that I also mentioned to David. I think 5 double days is excessive. 3 double days may work, depending on how long they are, and it sounds like you shortened them a little bit, so I want to make sure that they were, 82, 85 feet or something, to make sure that we needed to put 2 trucks back to back, that we got to do that. But after the last meeting, I also mentioned to David, being a little provocative, it's, Jamie, to your comment, that what's special about a main station, it's really administrative offices and the training space. The right size, the apparatus space. And while those functions are advantageous to have located where the apparatus is and where the firefighters live, they certainly could be accommodated elsewhere. So if you could even think about pulling those functions out, making almost a substation in the city, and then figuring out among the DAFD, where do you locate the main administrative offices, which could be the administrative offices and the training space. It could be a completely separate building, and it could be something that's cost shared for those functions. So we kind of got 3 similar appointed stations and sort of administrative space somewhere else, or maybe in the future accommodated, integrated into the building or expansion of the building. So I think that those are important things. As far as the apparatus, we've got an officer meeting tomorrow at 7:30, and that's one of the things on the agenda is a challenge to the officers to say, okay, the Dexter Fire Department has 3 stations. Let's pretend we don't own a single fire apparatus. How would we want to equip the fire department to respond? Because I think in some ways, we are continuing to propagate a model that all started with all the response out of downtown. And now that we have substations, I think that there's opportunities to redistribute apparatus and potentially even source different apparatus. And I want to make sure that before we purchase additional trucks and make big commitments, that we have some plan for what's the ultimate. And I know we can't sell everything and start over, but I just want to make sure that the decisions going forward sort of fit into what we think is a long-term vision, not just trying to continue to replicate what we've always had because we're comfortable with it.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Chief, to kind of build on that statement, if the training was held off-site, would the officers on, or would the firefighters on duty use DAFD trucks to get to that meeting? Or would they use their own personal vehicles?
No, I guess it depends if they're training while working or not. If they're coming from home, they're probably going to just drive to that site in their own vehicle. If they're working, we do that now, Training tonight is out of Station 2, and the downtown truck and the Webster truck are all driving over to Station 2. If there's an incident, they're all going to be responding from there back here. So that's why I say that location has some flexibility, because someone's going to have to move to get there. In fact, 2/3 of the people, and if it's a completely independent site, all 3 stations are going to have to move to get there. So it does provide some flexibility in where that's located. There may be a more central spot, but for the whole area, that makes sense and has available space. Since space here is obviously.
But so folks understand, when we're doing training, that adds 6 to 8 minutes response time to get to the city, because there's no one at the station.
If the training's out, it's
Can
best
I
time.
get some clarity on this real quick? How often are we having training? Because we're acting like we're having it all day, every day right now.
Ideally, it should be once a week.
Okay,
It's not.
Then I'm comfortable
It's
with
once
that.
a month now.
No, 3 times a month. 3 weeks a month. But to Sean's point, one thing we're also going to talk about tomorrow is implementing sort of station-based training that may require less of getting everyone together, so that it limits the movement of the apparatus and the distribution issues of having everybody pulled to one location, which disadvantages the other 2/3.
I guess that brings a lot of clarity for me based on that line of thinking, if that's where we're headed. The fact that we're not doing training every single day, the fact that many of us don't think that we should, the citizens of this municipality should bear all of this burden. This whole time I have wondered why we have had to have this huge training. I mean, this training thing for me has been a non-starter. I don't think we should be paying for that by ourselves. I really just don't. And based on everything that you just said,
And speaking of that,
it doesn't, and
it
so.
doesn't have to be a dedicated
Yeah.
training space for the fire department.
Right.
There was a community space that was large enough,
Sure.
we had access to, that certainly we could make it work.
And I guess I also say that based on what I know about the percentage, you know, where the runs are happening, the current response time, and how that would really affect things if this training was not at our station. Doesn't seem like something that is cost effective for our citizens, in my opinion. And, you know, I mean, the cost benefit doesn't make sense to me. I don't know if I'm alone in that, but I have a problem with it. So,
Well, and the reason we have to bear the cost is because we put the terms in the contract.
and I don't agree with that necessarily, because from what I've heard of that, there is no actual contract, and that goes back years and years and years and years to something that's not really relevant to the way that things have developed around here now. So I'm not saying we don't have to adhere to it, obviously, but I think that it's not black and white like that for me.
I could follow up on a couple of points I heard from mine.
Sure, yeah, please,
So
please.
in the concept of reducing size and then maybe first costs and the idea that maybe less bays are acceptable. What if, instead of reducing bays from side to side, reduce the depth of it right now for a pull through, but only one apparatus? Maybe it's 4 bays, 1 apparatus. First cost goes down, but it gives you the flexibility to add, and the only real way you can to apparatus is front to back, not side to side. You can add another apparatus line behind the front in the future if it were needed. Reduce your cost now, reduce size too. If the operation size is okay, less than it is. Just a thought.
I like all those ideas, that.
It gives you the ability to expand in the future. And it reduces
Yeah,
cost today.
The only. Does that get you to the 6? I don't know if that's the magic number here. I'm trying to ask if that's the right number. I don't know. So,
If
50%
you
more
kept
is
5, reduced it to the ladder, maybe you have the 2 smaller in one of the 5 bays, you have 6 apparatus in 5 bays. That's really only size to accommodate a ladder. And in the future, you could add enough new depth to double apparatus bays. And that's just a concept. The real equation has to be worked out in numbers, but there's a way to save and add on. And that's the key thing is we can make a decision, you can make a decision to reduce scope or serviceability today, but you might want to have the flexibility to add it later. And that might be a way to do it versus like we were looking at Main Street, 2 bays that just oppose each other. You wouldn't want to set yourself up for that at the mass site. It's just an idea.
So one of the things that the chief mentioned was this opportunity right now that they can look at the functions and how things are working, right? We, in my line of work, we always think, don't use the technology tool before knowing the functions and knowing the use case. So it is interesting to rethink a little bit based on the ideas of now that there is the two stations and this is station, how things are done, and not, as you mentioned, do things just because we did it the same way always. So why, how that would impact this station, and to me, that's not like really like, oh, okay, we changed a whole lot, but also give us that opportunity to, at this point, think of both things at the same time.
To the point about moving the sheriff's substation, I understand that that would likely reduce capacity in the existing building. I don't know how I feel about spreading out these like municipal buildings across 3 different sites. So now we have the separate city office here, and we have a site that is the fire station, and we have a site that at least partially is the sheriff's substation. I feel like that we don't have a lot of real estate here, and I feel like, I don't know if that limits the, what could potentially happen at 8140. So I think I'm okay, definitely okay reducing the size. I would need to think more carefully about what does 8140 look like then if the sheriff's substation stays there, what other spaces there? Are we able to generate any tax revenue from any of these properties? Because suddenly, we could have had a solution where everything was all on one site, freeing up 2 additional sites, and now we're looking at a scenario where maybe we have 3 sites that are taken up by municipal services.
We've got 3 sites right now taking up.
Right, and we're trying to, I think, reduce that. I did not vote for this.
No, I know, yeah, no, I hear you. One of the things that I think will make this harder is if we try to take on the question, what ultimately should go at 8140. I think that makes this an exponential factor, I don't know what it is, harder if we're trying to sell a new station of some size and an idea of what we want to do at 8140. I think the logical progression is to figure out what station size we're selling, and if it's at the nav site, then fine. And then come back and look at what's 8140, because I'm not sure, I don't know if we're united about whether it should be on the tax roll or should remain public property. I mean, it's, it's right along the river. There's a whole bunch of concepts there. I know the Parks group got into that a little bit, and rightly so. Those are all fair questions, but I think this makes it a lot harder to have an absolute answer to that question. Is all.
But if you leave the sheriff's substation there, then it's already making a decision.
It's making a decision on the interim. It doesn't mean that you couldn't put it over here at some point in another question. But if you took let us, I'm just trying to figure out how do we pay for what we really need to pay for.
Yeah.
And having the police downtown isn't a bad thing either. They've just mobilized their bike unit. That's a convenient spot for them to launch. Wow.
I have a couple of comments, I guess, on that. If we left the substation where it is, would that really be monopolizing? I mean, that's not monopolizing that whole building for municipal use necessarily, right?
Sure.
And I would say anecdotally, as somebody who has been here for a long time and who has traveled from the township to the city and who knows tons and tons of people who do that all the time, still today, my family, my extended family, friends, all these people, I will tell you that anecdotally having that sheriff station right there is a benefit for the city from things that I hear and know from my network of family and friends, like having it there reduces people driving through town, speeding, from the township through drag racing through town, like doing all sorts of things that I'm not saying would definitely happen, but I know from my life.
What's your friend?
Yeah, I didn't say it was all my family.
I'm gonna throw this giant spaghetti ball out there. Why don't we size it for just the city of Dexter and look into leaving the AFD? We'd have to buy our own equipment, but we would no longer be burdened by the legacy costs. Or rather, we don't leave the DAFD, we just have our own entity that does our runs inside the town, so we don't actually have any shared costs. Then we build just what we need.
Shared cost.
I think the shared cost of what we get
What's our benefit?
from the overhead, I think we're better off staying with the AFD. I mean, that, we would, I mean, before I went down that path, we'd have to do a whole analysis of that. And I don't know if we have time for that before when we want to put a question out there. What's the deadline again? August 16th or something?
Yeah, that kind of study would take some time. Especially if you wanted to, do something like looking into, could it be a combined police fire department?
Yeah, well, I've always thought that regionalized fire service and rescue service is a good thing. I mean, 13, 15 years ago, we tried to talk about should it even be broader than what it is now with the 3 townships. I still think that's a longer term model that will play out in somebody's timeframe over here, because the benefit of all working together with maybe not necessarily less people, but under one uniform thing, I think has a lot of merit, but maybe not the time for that.
I don't think that's a bad idea. I understand, we probably don't have time to investigate it. But we do get questions from residents often, why don't we have a dedicated police department? And we've been told it's cost.
You know, I think it's possible.
I can't point to the numbers to say that it is, I'm not saying I don't believe it, but I don't have. I just think, obviously it's trade-off. And so if what is important to people is having a physical presence here, I mean, we talk, I think something we don't necessarily have a great handle on is how often are sheriff's deputies actually here? How often are they actually responding to citizen requests to, I don't know, patrol certain areas? We see all like the in and out time, and this is not going on a tangent, but I think there are ways, there are nuances where even if the dollar amount might be more for a combined solution here, I think the level of service we would get for the dollar amount would actually match the expectation. I think now there's a chance of spending money for resources. I mean, we're talking about how all these calls don't come here anyways, but yeah, we're having to pay for the facilities and all these things. Well, I don't know, even if you had a little bit more, if you knew it was all just dedicated, I think that's your full swallow then.
You still have to be ready for the response though. I mean, the hard part about the public safety services is that you're always preparing for the worst, even if you're not 100% of the time staffed for it. And whereas we get the benefit of a shared cost across captains and sergeants and chiefs, or lieutenants and assistant chiefs in the fire service, you're going to lose all that efficiency, and you're still only going to have 1.5 cars. I mean, unless you want to. The last time we looked at the cost, it was significantly more to do it. Is all
Electric Shepherd has its own.
and we don't get out of the legacy cost just because we leave the department. We get dragged into our 3rd or 40, whatever percentage you want to call it. It's still gonna be ours because we can't leave them with the. We'd have to pay our way out. Well, they've got like a $2.5 million OPEB legacy. It's only funded at about 150,000, or I might be off by a little bit, but magnitude wise, it's 10% funded versus, how we are here almost 80 or 90, wherever it is, whatever it is. And there's a lot to think about with those questions. Is all. And I don't think the survey results reflected that we should have our own department. I mean, we didn't answer that question, but we don't have the data to even describe what that would look like either. And most of those comments are very positive about the service that we get, not only from police and fire, but that's what we're doing. So let me just ask a general question. So obviously July 11th is today. We've got the July 25th meeting, which is our second meeting in July, and then we have August. Your question?
I will not be here on the 25th.
Okay. Okay.
I will be under a knife.
And then, oh. Okay, all the best to you on the 25th.
Yeah. I can't even tell you everything about it.
Don't worry about this yet. But I guess what I'm getting at is, and then, I believe August 8th is the date for our first meeting in August. So without, a special meeting of any kind, I think it would be good if we asked staff maybe to work towards a question that we can review and draft, so that we can not be looking at it the first time on August 8th. And I'd like to see what that looks like. I know there's some samples in here, but I think we need to have a discussion about the question, I guess is what I'm doing that. I guess I'm driving towards that. If we're gonna do this, I think we should start looking at the questions more specifically. So everybody needs to think about where they want to be with, the ask and what the vision is. If there's something they need Justin and David to do to come back to us, relative to some of those ideas, reduced footprint or whatever. It might be nice to know what that number is.
I'd also be interested in the opportunity to do special assessment to pay for it as opposed to millage, what that looks like. My research, I've seen a lot of communities that use special assessment instead of millage to pay for fire and police services, including townships in the cap. The thing I like about that is it allows you an opportunity to pay it all at once, so it's no longer a burden on the property. So if you got the money to pay in the first year, it's done. I'd like to see what that might look like.
Can you research that a little bit? That's an option. Yes.
It's been really helpful to me to have Doug here, so thank you for coming. Some things that you've said, I don't think we've thought about. You should, thank you.
So we've got about 8 minutes before we start. Why don't we,
And I just want to say something for the sake of transparency and, the public. And I know, Jamie, that you did oppose this many times throughout the process and had having concerns about it, but at the end of the day, on our June 9th meeting last year, you unanimously voted to amend the purchase agreement to reduce the cost of what we were paying for this building. And then at our next meeting on the 14th, we unanimously voted to enter into the closing. So I know you had concerns about it, but you can't say you didn't vote for it.
I didn't vote for the original.
For the what?
For the original.
Okay, there we go. That's fine. I just want to make sure.
I bonded for the money.
I just want to make sure that we're clear here, that we're all sitting in a building that at the end of the day, we all said yes to.
okay, let's take, David, thank you for coming,
Thank you.
for your work.
Very well.
Let's take the next 6 minutes or whatever and use the restroom or get another piece of pizza if you need or whatever.